Welcome to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith, and today I'm bringing you my October wrap-up. Those of you who watched my October TBR video will know I set myself a smaller TBR for October. That was one of the best decisions I've ever made, and I'm really happy to say I surpassed it. So I set myself a TBR of 15 books, and I actually ended up reading 22. Some of that was in audiobooks, some of that was in, I didn't actually do as much NaNoWriMo prep as I was thinking about doing, so I had a bit more time. But overall, I'm really chuffed with how this reading went. It's a horrible, windy, rainy November day outside, and I want to talk about some books. So welcome to my wrap-up. We're going to go chronologically, as we always do. I have Goodreads open here, so I can look at what I read. I counted Wicked Saints in my September wrap-up, even though I technically read it in October, so that hasn't counted at all, but I did read that then. First, I read To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. Now, this is a novella written in the same universe as her Wayfarers series. This is absolutely lovely. I know a lot of people have said, you know, the only criticism I have is that I wanted it to be a whole book, I wanted more. I actually think it's really well contained. I don't know that I could envision a whole book in this world. So this is the perspective of human space travellers who, I can't remember the name of their technology now. Is it going to be in the front? So somniforming, so sleep forming. So instead of like terraforming a planet, you form a human to fit that planet as they sleep and travel there. And it's just a really lovely, sometimes very difficult, but mostly just really nice slice of life sci-fi. It's exactly what Becky Chambers does well. It's really, really good. I love this. I'm so glad I bumped this into my October TBR, because if it sat on the shelf for longer, I'd have missed out, that's all. Next, I read Slay by Brittany Morris, which is a new YA contemporary, but with a sci-fi kind of element to it, story. So it's another one of these video game focused books, but the protagonist is a young black woman, which I thought was really cool. And obviously supporting diverse fiction is really important. So, own voices, YA contemporary. I'm not a huge fan of YA contemporary, as you'll know, and it was the contemporary aspects of this story that I was kind of like, no, I don't care too much. The actual plot is really interesting. It's kind of a mystery, kind of a thriller, with this whole video game and race element to it, which is all about safe spaces, so that was really good. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars, purely because I found some of the video game elements a little bit hard to believe, purely because I have a bit of inside knowledge in that my wife's actually a video game programmer, and just some of it felt a bit like, would you be able to do that as a 16, 17-year-old? I don't know if you would have access to those resources. But that's obviously my personal opinion, and I think someone else coming at it from a different perspective would have a really good time with this. It's good, it's just not for me. I'm not a contemporary reader, but those who are will probably very much enjoy this. Next, I read The Deathless Girls by Hargrave, which I'm very glad I will no longer have to say in this video. The Deathless Girls, which is obviously a story, the backstory of 2 of the 3 women from Dracula. I read Dracula last year? I think I read Dracula last year, and I really enjoyed it for all its kind of, it's a very silly book at its core. I thought this was really good notion, and the first kind of 80% of this book is really, really good, but she does not stick the landing, and I don't want to get too much into the ending because I think it's probably a bit of a spoiler, but it just felt like the book fell flat, like everything the book was trying to be stopped. It just went, nah, I'm not going to actually be that. You know, we don't need to give a backstory for all of these women. We can have one that's anonymous and pointless. I don't know. It felt weird to me. That's kind of what I've had with others of her books in the past, and this has made me think I probably don't need to read The Way Past Winter. I'm probably okay. Next, I read Secret of the Sirens by Julia Golding. This was a reread, but a reread from my childhood. This is one of the most nostalgic books. I'm definitely going to read the other books in this series. In this story, what's her name? Connie, who always has a bit of an affinity for animals, ends up in Cornwall, and yes, Cornwall. I think it's Cornwall. Anyway, some coastal town. She ends up there. She discovers that she's actually eligible to be a member of the Society for the Protection and Care of Mythical Creatures, which is just phenomenal. And it's all about the environment, and it's middle grade, but not annoyingly so, if middle grade annoys you. I love these books. I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of them. I'm definitely going to be picking them up. The middle grade person in us who always wanted to be a vet, this is the book for you. Next, I finished my audiobook of Radha Wit by Andrew Caldecott. This book was not for me. I don't know if it was that the audiobook wasn't very good or that the book was just not excellent, but I found it really confusing. The plot was I think it was dual timeline, but that really wasn't clear. So again, possibly the audiobook at fault, I'm not sure. If anyone's read these and absolutely loved them, could they maybe get in touch, write in the comments below, let me know what you love about them, because I'd love to know what I'm missing, because some people clearly really do enjoy these, but for me they were just, no, I'm not into it. Next I read Hex Life, which was sent to me by the lovely people at Titan. This is a collection of short stories that are all about witchcraft. I went through the authors of this to see if I knew any of them, and actually I didn't, so this was a really good exploration of some authors I didn't know. This is a really good mix of stories if you're the kind of person who likes to read really widely. I think this covers a lot of different, not genres, but tones. There's some that are very, very dark, there are some that are more lighthearted. I liked a lot of these, some of them really weren't for me. It was a really mixed bag. But I think this is a good collection. If you like short stories, if you're the kind of person who really looks for those, this would be a good one. It's a bit sad that it's now gone Halloween, because you can't read it for Halloween, but you might want to pick this up just for the winter months. Everyone likes a scary story. Next I read The Wendy, which has been on my TBR for a little while. This is a retelling / reimagining. I think reimagining is probably a better word of Peter Pan, but with Wendy as the protagonist. Wendy joins the army in order to protect Britain from the Innis Fae, basically the Fae, which is of course Peter and the Lost Boys, and some other stuff is going on. Captain Hook is like a captain in the army / navy, a bit wishy-washy as to which, but yeah, I was really surprised by these. Indie fantasy always is a bit hit or miss for me, more often miss than hit, but these I thought were really good. I'm going to talk about The Navigator as well, which is the sequel to that, which I also read this month, which was a really lovely sequel. If you know Peter Pan well, I think you get a bit more out of it because you know kind of who the characters are, but if you'd never come across Peter Pan in your entire life, this would stand as a book in its own right, which I enjoyed. You didn't have to know Peter Pan to like it. Would have maybe liked it if the second one went a little bit deeper, but you know, beggars can't be choosers. I'd recommend them to people who want that kind of, I describe it as maybe a holiday read, the kind of book where you're like, it doesn't matter if I don't enjoy this that much, you know, that kind of thing would be where I would go. Then I read Into the Crooked Place by Ali Christo. I was surprised by this one. I thought I was going to really, really like it or really, really hate it. And actually I ended up kind of sat in the middle. There are some bits of this story that are really good. I like the way that magic works. Some of the friendships were really nice. There's a bit of gay in it, which is always, always good. The main romance really didn't sit well with me. I think the male main character, Wesley, was trying to be like a kind of Kaz from Six of Crows, lovable rogue, and he just read to me as like not a nice person, so I didn't want to get on board with any of his ideas, and I didn't care when bad things happened to him, and so that was a bit of a problem for me. I still think her writing's really lovely, and I will definitely read more in this series, and I think it's the kind of story, there are a few of these on this list, I think it's the kind of story where a second book will make the first book better. Next, I talked about this in my Spooky Reads video. This is Monsters She Wrote, which is non-fiction. It's one of a few non-fiction books on this list, which is really exciting. Yes, this is edited by Lisa Kroger and Melanie R. Anderson, or possibly all by them. I'm not sure. This is a really lovely little book explaining the history and biographies of various women who've written speculative fiction and horror over the years, all the way from kind of pre-Mary Shelley to the future. This is really, really good if you're looking to expand your knowledge of publishing and fiction as a whole. This is the way to go. I actually talked about in the Spooky Reads video, I'd love a version of this for fantasy. I think that would be really cool. This would make a really lovely gift. If you're looking for a Christmas gift for a bookworm, this would be what I would go for. Next, I read The Beautiful by Renée Ahdieh. This has been one of the most talked about books. There are a few of those on here, kind of hyped up books. This is a vampire novel-ish. The vampires aren't that significant in the story, I don't think. They could just be posh people and the book would read the same. It's set in historical New Orleans. I can't tell you the exact period, I've forgotten, but it's set in historical New Orleans if that interests you. The story's okay. The main character isn't that annoying. I think her name's Celine. It just feels hugely atmospheric for very little plot, which, to be honest, is kind of what I've got from other Renée Ahdieh books, because they tend to be so romance focused. This didn't feel very romance focused, maybe, perhaps that was just my reading of it, but it did feel kind of, I want to create this world and I want you to live in it and I want you to soak up this kind of richness of detail, of description, but then the kind of plot, I was like, what, who's happening? There was this person was the murderer reveal at the end and I was like, wait, there was a murderer? It was like how over my head it went, but I did enjoy the experience of reading it. So make of that what you will. From that, I went on to one of my favourite books from this month. This is Deep Light by Frances Hardinge. I'm obsessed with this. This is one of the few books on this list that I'm going to now be buying a copy of. I don't always buy copies of ARCs, but sometimes I do, and this one I will be because I absolutely adored it. It's Frances Hardinge at her best. It's the most amazing world building, detailed culture, focus on storytelling. It's just, oh, it was so good. It's also a male, middle grade, lower YA protagonist, and normally I hate them, and I actually really like this. I don't want to go into too much detail because I really think this is a book to explore for yourself, but if you like books about the ocean, if you like books about stories, if you like books about gods, if you like books about gods that are a little bit evil, just go for it. Honestly, couldn't recommend Deep Light more. Next was another reread. I finished the audiobook of The Lies of Locke Lamora. This is kind of probably the second time I finished the audiobook of this. I listen to audiobooks when I'm going to sleep and when I'm kind of doing various tasks, and if I don't have a new one on the go, I was in between Rather Weird and the next one, which is also going to come up on this list. So I thought Lies of Locke Lamora. Normally I don't count the audiobooks that I listen to when I go to sleep. I was really careful with this one to make sure I wasn't falling asleep and then ignoring the next bit, you know. So it counts. It counts. Lies of Locke Lamora is of course amazing. If you don't know, it's by Scott Lynch. It's a great heisty, thiefy, lovable but terrible protagonist, but done really, really well. And yes, really enjoyed it. Next, I read probably one of the most hyped up books of this year. This is of course Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This book, I want to say I enjoyed reading it, because I did. It was the kind of interesting magic that I enjoy, young women in male-dominated spaces, which I enjoy. I'm upset that this book is so coloured by the fact that the publisher haven't put in content warnings, and I'm upset because it is really jarring when you get to the parts of this book that include rape of a minor, really horrible violence, and just, it's not pleasant to read, which is fine, but you have to warn your readers about it. That's going to come up later as well, and that's on the publishers, not on the Bardugo. But the actual book is quite good. It takes a long time to get going. It takes a long time for the main character to get any kind of gumption, so that opening of the book is a little bit frustrating. But after that, this book goes at a pace and it is very, very good. It's a shame that it's so spoiled by that lack of content warning. Next, I read Doing Time by Jodie Taylor, which I've talked about in what feels like many videos. This is a very good time travel book. It's the lighter of the two time travel books that are on this list. In my TBR, I talked about how I hadn't read The Chronicles of St. Mary's, but I thought this would be interesting as it's kind of a spin-off series. I was slightly wrong there. It was a little bit like A Little Hatred. You kind of have to have read St. Mary's to get the most out of Doing Time. You don't have to, but you probably ought to. So now I'm going to go back and read all of The Chronicles of St. Mary's at some point. They may go on my Christmas list. We'll see. But yes, no, Doing Time is wonderful. It's kind of like if you took all of the Space Gang books, like we're going to become a gang and go to space, but we're a posh boy and an unassuming girl with a terrible backstory. It's that. But time travel, not space. So yeah, very, very good, well written, fun, the kind of book where bad things happen, but you know that overall it's going to be okay, that kind of wholesome read. Next I read The Blackhawks, and this is a little bit complicated. I started The Blackhawks right at the beginning of the month, but I was reading it on my PC rather than on my Kindle. It was an ARC sent to me, so I was reading it on my PC, and I just must have messed up how I read it. I wasn't retaining anything. I couldn't remember what was happening flowing through, so I don't want to talk too much about this one. I ended up putting it at 3 stars because the bits that I took in, I did enjoy. There were some things where I was like, was this character necessary? And I genuinely don't know how much of that's on me for not being in the right headspace to read, or on the book for not being interesting enough to keep me engaged. So this is going on my reread list, and I will be reading The Blackhawks again, and I will talk about that in the future. Next, I read a book that I wasn't necessarily expecting to enjoy. This was The Gracier by Kim Liggett. This has been on my TBR for ages. They sent review copies months and months and months ago. This is a dystopian YA feminist-ish kind of story, so think like The Handmaid's Tale, Hunger Games, plus a few horror movies kind of combined. This surprised me with how good it was. I really enjoyed it. It's really nice, fast-paced, thriller vibes to it. There's some really disturbing moments in this story, don't get me wrong, and the ending let me down a little bit. I've talked about the ending in my blog post, which I will link below, which does have spoilers in, so I won't talk about that here, but if you want to know what my problem with the ending was, you can read that. Next, I read a book that I wasn't expecting to read this month. It wasn't on my TBR, but I was in a bit of a whimsical mood, so I thought, let's throw in something. So I read Girls of Storm and Shadow, which is of course the sequel to Girls of Paper and Fire. I love this. I did a read-along for this, which I will link below if you would like to read that. I just thought this was an exceptional sequel. I couldn't quite remember everything that had happened in book 1, but now I am definitely going back to read book 1 so I can read the two together, as it were, albeit out of order. This was really good. It's emotional. It's that kind of YA that hurts your feelings, but in a way that doesn't feel like, look at me, I'm the author, hurting your feelings. Don't you feel terrible? Aren't I an amazing writer? It doesn't feel like that. It just feels like the story is sad. I thought it was really, really good. Will definitely be rereading. Next, I finished another audiobook. I know, 3 audiobooks this month, it was intense. This was Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I think I picked this up in an Audible sale last month. I was mainly getting it because I'd heard a lot of people talk about this series. I know some people really, really love it, like special editions going around. And so I was like, well, let's find out what the hype is about. This isn't really a spoiler because it happens right at the start of the book, but if you don't want to hear anything about this book, walk away now. The main character, Darrow, I think, his wife dies right at the beginning of the book. His wife is hanged in front of him, and then throughout the rest of the book, every time he's in a crisis, he's like, but my wife has been hanged. And it's the most fridging of a female character I've ever come across. It's just so blatant and unapologetic of, this woman only served to make this teenage boy have feelings, and like, why... The rest of the book just really annoyed me. There are some bits of it that are really good. It gets very brutal towards the end. It reminded me of kind of like the bits of Cherub that make you kind of go like, There are some good bits within there. It does a lot about like human nature, leadership, that kind of stuff. You can see the themes, and a lot of people have said that they do get better in the following books, so maybe if those are ever on sale, I might pick them up, but I won't be rushing out to finish this series because I don't care what happens to Darrow. Next, I read The Future of Another Timeline by Annalee Newitz. This is from the same author who wrote Autonomous, which is another book that I really, really enjoyed. This is very good. This is the other time travel book on this list. This is the very, very bleak time travel book on this list. And this is the other one where I think it should probably have had content warnings somewhere in the physical copy. That's all I'm saying. Just because I think this is a book people will want to pick up. The cover is, you can't tell, but the cover is so bright. It's really disappointing that readers aren't going to be warned about stuff that happens in this book. But no, this is very good. It's very queer, which is unsurprising. The author is non-binary. It does a lot about feminism that feels intersectional in that way, which I really, really enjoyed. The actual time travel is cool. Doesn't get bogged down in science, doesn't get bogged down in paradoxes. This was just really good. I think I would definitely recommend this to anyone looking for good time travel fiction, but with the warning that there is also child abuse in this book, and it's of a dodgy nature. If you want to know more about that, feel free to message me. But yes, other than that, and with that in mind, I suppose, would recommend. Now we get on to the 2 books that I read for research for NaNoWriMo. As you'll know, I'm writing a book that involves a mortician. Oh, there's another book that didn't feature on this list. It's actually 23 books. I'll get back to that. I read Medieval Bodies by Jack Hartnell. This is a really good book if you're looking to find out about medieval attitudes towards the body. So mostly it's focused on medicine. There is some stuff about death in there. There's a lot to do with art. This was really, really interesting and definitely gave me some inspiration for my book. It's really well written. It doesn't feel too heavy or preachy. It's just interesting. And there are lovely, let me find one that isn't rude, full colour illustrations throughout. So yeah, it was a really, really good pop non-fiction book. Raising the Dead, less good. I think possibly because it was less relevant, I realised it was less relevant to what I wanted to do. So this is all about the experiments to do with galvanisation, which is basically electrocute a dead body and hope it comes back to life, is what I broadly got from it. This is all about how that was part of pop culture and people were talking about these experiments people were doing, and that may have influenced fiction. So that's like a side note, but that was what I took from it, is about how things that are happening now influence the speculative fiction that we write, which was interesting. The book's writing isn't that engaging. Yeah, this one I wouldn't recommend as much unless you're really, really interested in this topic. I lied, it's actually 23 books this month because I forgot to count. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Caitlin Doughty. This is her memoir of her time working in a crematorium, and it's just wonderful. It's wonderfully written. It made me cry several times. It made me laugh. It's just wonderfully written. If you're looking for non-fiction to read, this would be one I would definitely put on your list along with her other books. So yes, 23 books, 15 of which I talked about in my TBR, but 23 books overall. I'm really, really pleased with how my reading went this month. As you'll know, I have a slightly smaller, by which I mean quite a bit smaller, TBR for November, but who knows, maybe I'll read 50 books in November at this rate. Thank you so much for coming with me. If you want to support me in my book reading journey, then you can like, share, comment, subscribe. That really helps me out. You can follow me on all of my socials, and of course I will see you in the next one.